Hi. What you just heard were two sounds that I designed with the Presswerk Rev2. In this video I will show you how I designed these sounds, talk a little bit about the effects and how I would use them in my music. This video is the first part of a three-part series where I will show different aspects and techniques with sound design for Dub Techno music. Like I said in this video, the first one I will talk about a very basic setup and some basic sound design techniques on the Rev2. In the second video I will use some samples and software, and in the third one I want to use the Matriarch. I will create the first sound using the Presswerk Rev2, but I believe that the sound is nothing special and can easily be recreated with any other synthesizer using a similar layout. So first I create an init patch using down and hold. So I have the basic program where I just have one oscillator and basically nothing else happening. The first decision is which chord to play. I usually pick some minor chord. I think that's a regular thing to do with this kind of music. So I could play it like this with G, B flat and D. Or sometimes, depending on my mood, I'm using an inversion of this chord, which would sound like that. These are the same notes, G, B flat and D, but the D is transposed one octave down. So instead of this one, I could also play that. The second inversion would sound like this, but this is rather unusual for Dub Techno music, so I'm sticking to one of those two. There is a chord function on the Rev2. You could also do this with an Ableton plugin, but I hold all three keys of the chord and press the unison button. And then every time I press one key, all the three notes are playing. Okay, so first I have to bring down the cutoff frequency of the filter. Usually I put that to 0 so that I hear nothing. And then I slowly bring up the envelope so that I hear how the envelope affects the filter. With the init patch of the Rev2, you barely hear anything because the decay is so short. It's set to 0, which is not really a good value for an init patch, I believe. But, well, okay, so let's bring this up a little bit. And from there, the most important thing is working with your ears. So depending on the function of the sound in your track, it's important to find the right setting. Usually I layer some sounds, which I will do later in this video. So I start with a very short and plucky sound, and then the next sound has to be longer, with a longer and slower envelope. But let's make the first one a bit snappier. I also like to bring up the release so that the sound is not cut off when the note is lifted. It can still be very snappy with a short decay and low sustain, but I like to have the tail from the release, like this. Now I just copy the setting from the envelope of the filter to the envelope of the VCA, which is the volume, and then further tweak it until I feel that this is nice. Like this. Then I make sure that the key follow is set to 0, because the filter tends to spread with the key follow. So if you have the key follow to the maximum level, you can hear that the lowest note has a much more closed filter than the highest note. That is not cool, so I put this down to 0. Yeah, like that. So now this is the basic setup, and now I will bring the second oscillator into play, and there are basically two things that I do a lot. The first one would be to tune the second oscillator 1 octave lower than the first one. So I check by holding the show button and then using that one to see where the first oscillator is tuned. It's tuned to C2, so I will tune the second oscillator to C1. And then when I slowly blend in the oscillator mix, I can hear how the second oscillator sounds. Now it's time to dial in a little bit of oscillator detune, and there is a dedicated parameter for this on the Rev2. It kind of emulates the inaccuracy of old analog gear. So if you overdo it, it sounds not really good, but with the slight setting, it can add some movement to the sound. Okay, so another thing that I do a lot with the second oscillator is to tune it a fifth above the root note. So now it's set to C1. I will bring it back to C2, which means that both oscillators play the same note. But if I tune it to G, it's like a fifth above the root note, and if then I mix them together, it sounds like this. This sounds very interesting because it adds some nice overtones. So effectively you have this chord here, but you also get the notes F and A on top of it, which would be the 7th and the 9th in this chord. So it's a G minor 7-9 chord, if you do it like this. Okay, so I think now it's the time to lay down a simple pattern. For this I'm using Ableton so that you can easily follow what I'm doing. I switch on the metronome and yeah, just play a little sequence. Like this. Or maybe an octave lower. I want to do it again with an octave lower. Now it's time to add some effects. For this setup I'm using two of my hardware pedals, which are the Strymon Timeline and the Eventide H9, loaded with the standard reverb plugin. So the first one will be a delay, a tape delay emulation, and it sounds like this. It's important to find the right setting with the mix and feedback ratio. In a live situation it's very nice to play with the knobs and tweak the sounds a little bit, increase the feedback for a while and then get back to another lower setting, like this. Then I will add some reverb from the Eventide. That would be too much reverb. I usually start from 0 and dial it in slowly until I have the right setting. Okay, so that would be a starting point for a nice sound, but now I want to make it more alive and animate it a little bit so that it's interesting to listen for a whole track, which might go like 5 or 10 minutes. So the first thing I do is that I assign a modulation, in this case the velocity, to the cutoff frequency. To do this I go to the modulation matrix and go and select velocity as a source, and then I can hold the destination button and move the cutoff knob so that I will have the destination set to cutoff. Then of course I have to dial in the amount, maybe something in the middle. And so what now happens is that depending on the velocity, the filter opens. I have to bring down the frequency a bit because now the modulation also raises the cutoff frequency. Yeah, like this. And now in Ableton or any other sequencer that you use, you could also use a hardware sequencer, you can edit this clip and select different velocity settings to create a nice pattern. Maybe like this. The good thing about using the velocity instead of MIDI CC or automation is that you can still change all the parameters on the synthesizer and still have this little pattern. So I could completely close the filter and still have this effect going, and then I can slowly open the filter. Usually I pick another parameter that I also assign to the velocity. In this case, let's try to route the velocity to the decay of the filter, so that with the opening and closing of the filter triggered by the velocity, the same effect happens to the length of the decay curve. In the next step, I would assign the velocity to a second parameter. In this case, let's try the attack of the filter. So I would also pick the velocity as source for mod slot number 2 and put the destination to the attack of the filter. And now something very strange is happening here in the Rev2. You have to set the amount to a negative number to have a positive value. Yeah, so I asked them in the customer support, and they told me that this is a feature and their way to use the mod matrix. I don't understand it, but it's not me to judge. But if you are playing with the Rev2 and wondering why some things don't happen the way you expect them to do, now you know the reason. So negative amount means increasing value. Yeah, I think this is cool. So now I could also use an LFO to modulate something. Let's say, yeah, why not the filter to give it some more movement. So here I would go for a slow value. It's not showing the value in milliseconds or seconds, but instead you can watch the blinking LED to get to the right speed. And then I start at 0 and dial it in until I feel it sounds nice. As a last step, I want to assign the cutoff frequency to the modulation wheel. And the reason I do this is because when I do some patches that I use later in live performances or other tracks, then I want to make sure that the mod wheel is always using a range that makes sense in the context of this patch. So what I mean is, first create a new modulation slot. You can hold source and move the mod wheel, then it will create a new mod slot, and destination also to cutoff. And then I will set it to, let's say, -50. So that is maybe too much. Okay, let's create another one where the mod wheel increases the decay. Again, you have to use a negative value to do this. So now when I pull up the mod wheel, it closes the filter and opens the decay of the filter. So now when I save this patch and use it later, I can easily smooth out the sound and put it in the background of the track just by moving the mod wheel. I prepared a little beat for this one, so let's bring it in. Okay, so that would be the first sound. I will now record 8 bars or 16 bars because I want to create a second sound that will accompany the first one. The first sound was very short and plucky, so I want to create a second sound that is slowly evolving and a bit slower than the first one, using basically the same settings. So what I do now is I increase the attack speed of the filter envelope. And also of the amplifier envelope. That's already very nice. Let's record a pattern. Yeah, I like that, so I record that one to another audio track. Now that both sounds are recorded into audio tracks, I can start and do some mixing and apply some additional effects like compression. So these are the two sounds. What sounds good with that one is Presswerk from U-HE, and I am dialing in some bass compression. So this is just the bass compressor preset, and all that I do is that I slowly dial in the threshold until I have maybe something between 3 and 5 dB of compression. Then it's possible, but not absolutely necessary, to add a little bit of sidechain compression. For this, I am using the kick drum track from my drum kit. So what I now realize is that I don't like the first sound, so I delete the recording and go back to the original synth setting, and I want to have the sound with a more closed filter. Maybe increase the envelope attack a little bit to smooth out the attack. I think this is better. Okay, so I think this is it for today. I will create 2 more videos where I show how I do similar things with other synthesizers, also with software. So stay tuned if you want to see more, and thanks for watching.